call this District of Tofino regular council meeting to order for February 10th, 2015 at 10 a.m. and begin by making a motion to amend the agenda to remove item 3, reports, from the in-camera agenda. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor McMaster. All in favor? Councillor Thick?
Yes.
Thank you. And now a motion to adopt the agenda as amended, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. Seconded by Councillor Anderson. All in favor? Thank you, Councillor Thick.
Yes.
Thank you. And the motion is carried. Both motions are carried. Okay, some minutes from the regular council meeting held January 27th, 2015.
Move adoption.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Blanchette. Any discussion from the minutes? All right, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is carried. No business arising from the minutes. Just a couple of short announcements from me. First of all, I would like to thank everyone that was involved in making the visit on February 1st and 2nd, 2015 by the Lieutenant Governor of BC such a success. While in Tofino, she attended a community luncheon at the Royal Canadian Legion. She went for a walk on the Tonquin Trail with some of the members of the Tonquin Trail Committee and Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations. Had dinner at one of our fantastic local restaurants with representatives from the Tla-o-qui-aht Biosphere Trust. And then on Monday morning attended a school assembly at the Wickaninnish Community School. And this is the first visit by a Lieutenant Governor of BC to Tofino that anyone can remember in Tofino. So we were very honored to have her visit, and everything went really well. During her visit, we also were able to give a District of Tofino Volunteer Service Recognition Award to Dave and Yvonne Bond. And it was a lovely way to do it because having them in front of their peers at the Legion and having the help of the Lieutenant Governor to present the award was a nice touch, I think. And they have volunteered for a wide range of Tofino organizations for over 50 years, and it was a pleasure to recognize all their work. So that's it. We will move on. There are no delegations and no correspondence for information only, so we'll just move into correspondence requiring action. And the first is a letter from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers requesting our support to Save Canada Post. And I will open it up to Council and ask you what your wishes are.
Move to receive.
Okay, moved by Councillor McMaster to receive a correspondence.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any discussion? Councillor Thick, oh, sorry, Councillor Blanchette.
Just to say that I did ask at the post office, and we've had no effect from any of the cuts apparently in terms of lost hours or lost service because we don't have door-to-door delivery. I was curious about that.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'll call the question, and all those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
Yes, the motion was to receive for information?
Correct.
Yes, agree.
Great, thank you. Motion is carried. All right, second, letter from Elmer Frank, who's the Deputy Chief Councillor for Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations, regarding the extension of Tonquin Trail on District Lot 120. So as you can see from the letter in the package, Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations have agreed to apply with the District of Tofino for a license of occupation on DL 120 and work together in the extension of the Tonquin Trail. Staff have asked that we formalize movement on this project with the motion, and the recommendation is included on the agenda there. So I'll ask your pleasure.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you,
Second.
Councillor Anderson. So moved by Councillor Anderson and seconded by Councillor Thurgood that Council receive with thanks the letter from Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations regarding extension of the Tonquin Trail dated January 21st, 2014, and that staff be directed to work with Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations to make an application to the province of BC for a license of occupation through DL 120 for the purpose of extending Tonquin Trail to Middle Beach. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Thick, anything?
No, I'm just very delighted.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is carried. All right, moving into reports. We have a few verbal reports, and we're going to start off with Councillor Anderson and your recent board meeting with the Vancouver Island Regional Library.
Yes, it was the first meeting of a new term of councillors and board members. So it was an orientation session at the VIRL, and about half of the board members are new there. So we had quite an extensive staff presentation of strategic direction that the VRL is going in. So there isn't really anything new of real business to report. It was also the annual general meeting, and so the election of officers and the executive committee what took place, and that there was actually no election because most of the executive committee ran again, and exactly the same number as seats available put themselves forward as nominees for the position. So the election didn't take place, and we have a couple of new executive committee members at the board. I guess a couple items of interest to report. The VRL has now gone to digital agendas, so the paper agendas and the mailing of them and so on is no longer takes place. So I won't be providing them anymore, and we'll try to forward them to all councillors instead directly. And the other thing I'd like to report is that every VRL meeting we get a branch updates about what's taking place in terms of upgrades and new branches. And I just wanted to let everyone know once again that we're still on that list. And among, I just wanted to read out a list of communities that are at some stage in the process of either upgrading or replacing or getting a brand new library that they haven't had before, which is the case in Saanich, Souk, and possibly Sydney as well, who access libraries, from what I understand, through the Capital Regional District before, and now Saanich or Souk at least, and I think Sydney is the other one, are coming onto the VIRL, coming into the VIRL fold, so to speak. Anyways, and the list is North Cowichan, Sydney, Saanich, Souk, Campbell River, Nanaimo Harbourfront, which is getting an upgrade, Tofino, Tosses, and Port Hardy. So those are all the communities that are in the process of updating or getting a new branch. And as you know, on our agenda today, we're considering library as part of a potential new community building, and that's where we're at. So that's my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Anderson? Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on. The Local Government Leadership Academy, the elected officials seminar that Councillor Blanchette and I attended, was January 28th to 30th, and I'll ask Councillor Blanchette to lead us off.
A verbal report, my first. So it was a long 3 days. I went to, I think, 14 workshops and got a real sense of the enormous mass of legislation that underpins our little village here. It was a bit scary from that point of view. Among the best of the workshops were ones on financial management, which was dry but necessary, very informative. It made me sensitive to loading up staff with all kinds of frivolous requests and ideas. So I'll be bearing that in mind. The most interesting were ones on collaborative civic leadership and strategic decision making, dealing with roles and responsibilities and the kind of hourglass shape of the way it's supposed to work on the political versus the administrative realms, with the CAO being the pinch between them. And it also talked quite a lot about the sort of variety of personal styles in decision making and trying to bring all those together. And it made me think about they actually mentioned the sort of difficulty for a council, which is only really allowed to meet as a body in a formal meeting. So it's not really a case of being able to kind of shoot the breeze over a beer or a coffee. And so it takes some time to gel into an effective decision-making body. So I'm kind of sorry that we canceled our last COW meeting due to lack of agenda. Now I've got a list of half a dozen or more things that I can put on any agenda that have a COW meeting that doesn't have an agenda item. The most disappointing one was the communications in the media presentation, in which the presenter, he was from a media handling firm that deals with politicians at all levels, and he was just pushing this stick to the message tactic that, in my opinion anyway, has ruined political discourse in this country for the last 10, 20 years. You never give a straight answer, just keep repeating, just keep parroting what you want to get across. So I see we have a media person in attendance, so I'll try not to be that guy. And when I went, they said, this is the seminar, a lot of people told me, this is the seminar at which they scare the hell out of the newbies. And I'm happy to report that the hell has not been scared out of me. And that almost half the people there, by my estimation, are returning, people who've been there before. And I can see why. There's tons and tons to learn. So I will probably be going back in a year or two and see what more I can pick up. And that's my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Blanchette? So I attended as well, and like Councillor Blanchette, I found it pretty overwhelming, the amount of time from 7 in the morning until 6 at night, and you don't really get a chance to stand up and stretch your legs. But for me, the highlights of the Local Government Leadership Academy were an in-depth legal clinic on public hearings. And in my time as Mayor of Tofino, we have conducted very few public hearings, so it was nice to have a chance to go through an actual skit and exercise on public hearings with lawyers present who can give advice on what to do and what not to do, and to just truly understand the different role that council plays when it conducts a public hearing, which is very different than the legislative role that we play during a regular council meeting. The second highlight was, like Councillor Blanchette, I attended a session on financial management, but he went to the one for new elected officials and I went to the one for returning elected officials. And this one was one in which the presenter, in 2 hours, made a very passionate call to action to municipal elected officials to really deal with the infrastructure gap that municipalities face, and to use UBCM much more effectively as a place to lobby and discuss things with the province, which is very awkward because as creatures of the province, I think we go to UBCM feeling that we're at their mercy, so to speak, but at the same time we face a very, very real crunch with trying to fund infrastructure upgrades that we simply don't get the tax dollars to do. And the third highlight for me was a session on public engagement, which I always enjoy going to because I always pick up a few tips. And I really enjoy meeting people from other municipalities and discussing how they undertake their public engagement and what's worked and what doesn't work. And in that seminar, we had a chance to use a little mini case study on kind of putting some brains together on what you would do to approach an issue. So I asked the group if we could use dog leash and dog poo bylaw issues as the case study, and they went for it. So it was great. It was really interesting to work through some of the things that Tofino is facing and the discussion that we had at our last council meeting, and got some great ideas that I'll bring forth to the town hall meeting and discuss with you when we get to planning that town hall meeting. So it was very interesting. And that's my verbal report. Any questions from anyone? No? Okay, and then we'll move into our last verbal report, and that is Councillor Blanchette is our appointed liaison to the Wickaninnish Community School Society and attended a meeting on February 2nd. Take it away.
Yes, I'm pleased to report it's quite a new board, and there's a bit of rejuvenation going on. And they spent the first, there was a dozen people on the board. At the first board meeting, about 10 of us were there. They spent the first hour on going through a kind of a mini manual on being an effective board member and what board members can and should not do, i.e. not micromanage and take the long view and the high road. So the two chairs, Tarny Jacobson and Cheryl Graham, are particularly concerned to keep the board functioning and not falling into some of the issues that it had in the past. The second item on the agenda was the topic of gym use, which everybody had been kind of waiting for. And it was really a no-brainer. Sheena Walker, the programmer, has no trouble. This is evening slots for the Wickaninnish Community School gym. At the gym stakeholders meeting, it was made clear that the mandate for both the school district and the Wickaninnish Community School Society was to serve youth, children, youth, and families. And any extra gym slots would be available for community adult use. There are no extra gym slots. The programmer was able to fill every 2 slots a night, 5 to 6:30, 6:30 to 8:30, with items like volleyball for grades 5 to 7 and basketball for the 13 to 17-year-olds, school or family gym time. And in fact, she said she had a list of both events and attendees to replace should any of those programs be under-attended. That she'd be able to fill more. The one problematic one was youth night, and that's Friday nights, and that's because staff is required for that, so they're casting about for partnerships. They may be in touch with Parks and Rec to look for staff and trying to drum up some funding or some volunteers to staff that night. But the upshot is that all evening slots at the gym are full, so there won't be any available for community adult use. The topic of weekend use did come up, but that's strictly up to School District 70. It's not within the Wickaninnish Community School Society's purview. So the Principal Ryan did say he would look into it, but he was not hopeful that anything would come of it. So the WCSS has put out a press release, so it should be this information should be coming out into the public realm sometime this week, and well, we'll move on from there. It's looking good for them to be fulfilling their mandate in a pretty effective fashion. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Councillor Blanchette? None? Councillor Thick, any questions?
No, that's good, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. All right, so we're going to move into our zoning amendment application. This is the Ventura application for 511 Campbell Street. And we have a report from Aaron Rogers, and we have Aaron approaching the podium to speak to us. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be back. So, we council has this report in their package. It's a zoning, it's to do with the zoning amendment for Ventura for the property next to Cedar Corner on Campbell Street, and there's a recommendation for council to set a date for a public hearing, a second public hearing. So, just a brief background. I'll just give you the latest part of the background. We had the second reading of this rezoning in September. We had a public hearing in October. After the public hearing, staff met with the applicant to discuss the next steps, and we were provided with some new information on the file, meaning that we have to go back to another public hearing to bring that into the public record. So the new information that we received was to do with the requirements of the applicant's lender, and so in order to finance this project, the applicant's required to go to a lender. The lender saw the covenant on the property for the use of the daycare space, and that raised red flags for them and basically said, we can't borrow you the money if this covenant is in place. And so the applicant came back to us and said, this covenant can't go on title, and so what can we do? And so we had a discussion about that. The end result of that discussion was that the applicant offered an additional $5,000 to go towards an aquatics programs and the installation of an earthquake sensor at the property. I can probably answer questions about this as we go through this. I'm just going to give a brief overview now. The report's a little bit more detailed. So the covenant itself, why do we do covenants and zoning? So the use of the daycare space on the property is included in the zoning bylaw, and that says for this space you can only put a daycare in there. What we do sometimes in rezonings is we also include a covenant, and what the covenant does is sort of support the zoning use. And they're quite different tools, but what the covenant allows a future purchaser to do is to see that there's a covenant on title restricting the use. You could also find that out if you read the zoning bylaw, and assuming that you're an intelligent buyer, you would look at the zoning bylaw before purchasing this. To remove a covenant is actually easier from a council perspective than a zoning use, because you'd have to go through a rezoning process, meet with council, go through a number of readings and a public hearing. A covenant can be removed by a simple resolution of council. So the long and short of it is that the use of the daycare space is still protected through the zoning. We just don't have the additional protection of the covenant. In recognition of this sort of reduction of protection, the applicants offered the amenity. The earthquake sensor was offered as well as an additional amenity. It's part of a wider BC network that is being set up and is partially active to provide early warning notification for earthquakes. The more sensors in the system improve the overall operation of the system. The sensor itself is meant to last about 10 years. There is no actually early warning notification attached to this. The sensor is part of a system. The system would sort of generate a notification. The sensor that was installed in Tofino wouldn't actually fire a siren or tell you to do something. So the question here, I guess, for council is whether this is an amenity for Tofino or whether it's a wider amenity for the province. And I hope I haven't confused the issue. I'd like to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for staff? Questions from the report? Councillor Anderson.
I wanted to know what zoning is the daycare and the commercial uses? Is that all the same zoning, or is the daycare a different zoning within the building?
So there are a number of commercial uses and a residential use permitted in the zoning. The middle unit, which is a large unit specified for the early learning center, is actually specifically zoned for early learning center. It can't be anything else. So the two wings on either side of it can be retail or commercial, basically. The middle unit, which is the large unit, can only be a childcare center. They can't, the applicant, without rezoning, the applicant couldn't change that use.
Okay, so to follow that on that. So it's kind of protected to be a daycare just within the zoning, even without the covenant.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Master.
You might not be able to answer this, but I had a hard time understanding why the lender, if zoning protects as a daycare centre, why the lender doesn't object to that.
So again, I don't know if I can answer that, but I had the same question in my head. But I believe because it's not going on title, the bank won't look at it the same way as the zone. In fact, it is the same thing, but whatever the process is the bank's using, it's when it goes on title, which is the covenant, that raises the red flags for them. Obviously, if the applicants would default on the mortgage, the bank would have to resell the property. The covenant's going to be there. I think it's a valid question.
I think I would like to hear from a bank or a lender because most people that are going to purchase property are getting a mortgage, so you're forced to do a title search, so you're going to find that out anyway. I'd like to know if the lender is aware that this property is protected by the zoning.
Right.
Because if they're not aware, then we're open to a possibility of mortgage fraud, and that is very dangerous. So I think before I can make any decision, I'd want to hear from a lender as to what their view is.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Blanchette.
Yes, as an early learning center, it's just a stone's throw from what's arguably the busiest intersection in town and the highway leading into town. So it's not really an ideal location. I think ideally you'd want a kindergarten, a daycare center located kind of away from the main traffic centers. Does it make any sense to have a covenant that says this can't be changed, but if you want to change it, you have to provide an alternate location?
I think that's a bit outside the scope of what's been discussed, so we're just discussing this one property. And I think it would be outside of our authority to put a covenant saying if you don't do this, you have to do it somewhere else. I would also add that I visited a number of childcare centers, and one in downtown Portland, and they're on much busier streets than we are here. And, we have had this discussion on the previous council term about location with respect to the safety of the children, and the applicants explained to council about where the play areas would be and the fencing, so that it would be generally put towards the back and the side of the building. But to include, again, if the lender is raising issues about covenant for this, I'm not sure what the usefulness of adding a covenant, asking the applicants to do it somewhere else. So that would assume, we'd have to assume that the lenders had a different piece of property that they could develop. You know, it would be a different conversation about a different property.
It does give them an out, though, if they have, because it is a high traffic area, it's a very good commercial area, like a retail area, that sort of thing. If they had $1 million or a $1 zillion idea and wanted to make the change, would they be able to do that, or are they entirely locked in?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question? I'm a bit confused.
I'm just worried about, I'm wondering about, we've locked in through zoning and possibly a covenant, an early learning center.
Sure.
If they wanted to change that, they would go through a rezoning process,
Yes.
and then we would decide the fate of the daycare at that rezoning.
Yeah, so in the event that, say, the daycare didn't work out in 3 years and the applicant said, oh my God, we need to do something to fill that space up, they would have to come back to council and say, council, this is not working, we'd like to rezone the use to this, and this is our proposal, you know, including the discussions around amenities and what that parking and that future use. So it's pretty safe. It's about as safe as you can get with it in zoning. We wouldn't need an extra covenant that tells us to do that. It would just be part of the process.
Right.
And then it's just a matter of us making sure that if that use changed without being asked, that the bylaw officers and the bylaw department is, you know, monitoring that kind of stuff. Yeah.
With respect to the covenants, it's my understanding it's registered on title of a single property. It can't involve other properties that may or may not be owned by the same person. So to your first question, I think we need to deal with it property by property. Councillor Thurgood.
What zonings are being applied to this particular piece of property?
So currently it's an R2 property, so a duplex property, and the applicant is proposing to do a comprehensive zone that would allow for retail commercial use and the residential use upstairs, and then the early learning center on the ground floor as well.
So it's an R1?
It's a comprehensive zone. So what we do in Tofino, because our zoning bylaw predates 2 of our OCPs, is that almost every zone that we have to deal with is it's a brand new, it's comprehensive, until such time as we get our zoning bylaw caught up to the OCPs.
It's not a huge piece of property, so is this unusual for a small, like I can see acreage maybe being that, but is it unusual?
For the what they're proposing?
Yeah.
Not in Tofino. I mean, every town is unique and every property is unique, but
Yes.
you know, a number of the last. This is I think I don't have it in front of me. I think we call this DC6. This is the 6th one we've done in the downtown core. Similarly to this, the difference for this one is it has the early learning center attached as well as the use. But if you think about the property, it used to be Tofino Fishing and Trading. Next door neighbors were next door to that, where the bus was to go. The property down here where Mark Argent's gallery is, the gateway. These are all sort of variations on the same theme, which is sort of a mixed use, sort of a really mellow mixed use zone.
Any other questions of staff? Yes, Councillor Blanchette.
In your report, you say, in March 2014, staff met with applicant to discuss matters relating to affordable housing and a bunch of other things. Is there an affordable housing component to this at all?
So as part of the original amenity offer, the applicants offered a $10,000 amenity to go towards our affordable housing fund.
Okay, but not on this property?
On this property, yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So what had happened is when the applicants came forward with the zoning, they came with an amenity package. The amenity package would basically, this covenant or this request to have the ELC be a use that was seen as an amenity, something that arguably needs. And then we had a conversation, they also offered a cash contribution of $10,000 to the affordable housing initiative, so to our fund.
Okay.
And then this additional, now that the covenant may have to be, or is asked to be removed, they've offered another $5,000 towards aquatic programs, and they've also offered the earthquake sensor, which may or may not be an amenity as council decides.
One more remark. I've been looking into the school seismic situation, and there are on the order of 120 schools needing upgrades in the province at a cost of well over $1 billion. Wickaninnish Community School is rated H3, H1 and H2. H3 are in decreasing levels of risk. We're rated H3, so we're in the bottom third roughly of that list of 120. So it's not likely that we're going to get any seismic work done in the near future anyway. So it's not likely that an earthquake sensor would get installed at Wick School. So this would come along much quicker than it would if it were installed at school.
Sure. And even if it was to be installed, that money apparently has to come out of the same bag of money that you're doing the improvements with. And so if imagine those improvements are quite expensive. And if you used it all up just to make sure that it was safe, you might not put the sensor in.
Right.
Is what I've been made to understand.
Councillor Anderson.
I just had some questions around the new amenities that were offered. The aquatics contribution of $5,000. How it says it's for water polo equipment and stuff like that. We don't have access to much pool time here, and the pools aren't that great. So I'm just wondering how that would be used, and how long would you see that money lasting for? Just because, to me, I kind of think of amenities as something that's going to be around for a while, and this is kind of a contribution that seems to be used up in a few years.
And so it would be.
Maybe I'll speak to the other ones. So you can talk about both of them, and then also the earthquake sensor has an expected lifespan of 10 years. It says. So I'm just wondering, in terms of amenity contributions, these kind of disappear over time.
So to speak to the first one, to the aquatics amenity, we've been in discussions through Parks and Recreation with the applicant. Originally, we had sort of talked about pool time. It's just not that easy to get more pool time from their current pool suppliers, and so we sort of had an ongoing conversation about what that money could be used to. If it could be used for recreational based activity, something to do with aquatics, that's what the applicants were interested in. So we looked at the water polo stuff. The $5,000 would probably be gone, not in a couple of years, but within 6 months. We've run a couple of programs, buy some equipment. Some of that equipment may go further. Water polo equipment may last for a number of years. But yeah, it's more of an activity amenity rather than a building. Speaking from my own perspective, things that improve overall community life, like learning how to swim or learning how to do water polo, working the team, are things that pay back to the community over decades. And they're not a building, but it is something that is still real. It's just you can't measure it. With respect to the earthquake sensor, I've done as much research as I can and I can understand. Apparently, the 10-year lifespan is to do with the changes in software and programs, and as these systems evolve, they don't expect their system to last more than 10 years. This was what I've been told.
And just continue on that, is that something that basically would need upgrading to continue after 10 years?
I would.
And then, if so, would the district
This is
want to do that, or be on the hook to do that? Or?
exactly. So it's a private property, and the agreement between the University of British Columbia and the property owner is a private agreement that we're not party to. So we'd be looking for some sort of covenant to ensure that it was installed. But as for long-term management, we don't even know how long the system's, and it sort of gets a bit more diffuse as you move out through the years.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Thank you. Any other questions, staff? Councillor, think any questions for Aaron?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. I can't hear all the nuances of the conversation, so I don't know if my question is a pertinent one. But as I understand it, the public hearing this is being triggered again between second and third readings because there has been new information added. Am I correct in that assumption?
You are. You're correct.
Okay, and so my question, I guess, is that I think this has been something that I've been interested in the council tackling for the last couple of years, but I do think that there needs to be some changes in the DAC policy as it currently stands. I just want to express my opinion that I'm not in favor of the community managed contributions as we've stated in the package. And according to best practices guide for BC, I believe that community managed contributions should be pre-planned and should be capital in nature. That's what I've read to understand. And I do understand that, each applicant, is a unique situation. And I hear that, and I am in no way, I'm very supportive of what's being offered. However, I don't think it suits us well in the long term. So I would like to see the council actually tackle this in a more thorough fashion. And that would be the reason that I'm not in agreement with the recommendation without having the community amenity contribution set by council. And I'd like to see that happen further to the February 17th strategic planning session. So
Okay.
that's my comment at the moment.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you, Councillor Thayer. That's a nice segue. I think we've asked staff questions, and so I would say, if you want to sit down, go ahead and
come back up and
council. So what we need to discuss now is we have a recommendation from staff to move forward to a public hearing given the new information. We've had a few different expressions of opinions about the suitability of the new amenities that have been offered in lieu of a covenant, and I'd like to see the conversation focus on that a little bit more now and get a sense from council where you want to go. Councillor Anderson.
There were some questions to me around the rezoning, and I'm struggling with it in just terms of our total housing supply. We're losing basically 2 residential unit zoning, and there will be 1 residential unit and 2 commercial units plus a daycare. So that our need for housing actually increases with this zoning because there's more commercial spaces, presumably more employees in Tofino, and at the same time the housing stock's going down, so the amount of what's being provided in terms of housing is dropping by a unit, and then the housing is going up by maybe a couple of units more. So that was my first sort of, after the last public hearing, thinking about this. Those were the kinds of things I was thinking about. And then with the new amenities offered, I'm not completely satisfied with them. I maybe would like to see the contribution towards affordable housing go up by 5,000 rather than aquatic contribution to disappear over a short period of time. And also the earthquake sensor will not last forever, although I think they're both good things. I think my priorities just lie elsewhere in terms of amenity contributions. So I'm not in support of going to public hearing at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Answer?
I'd agree with what Councillor Anderson said, and again, just because I have a broker's license in Alberta, until I had assurances that the lender was aware that the zoning would keep this as an early learning centre, I can't support the motion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Or recommendation.
Councillor Thurdy?
I agree with what Councillor Thick was saying about the concerns about the amenities, and as Councillor Anderson expressed as well, is that the whole program, aquatic program is great to have. I would like to see something more substantial, not in value, but in substance.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Blanchette?
I just have some questions in mind about the earthquake warnings, early warning sensor. Nobody would require, or nobody has more need of earthquake early warning than Tofino. But I'm not sure if this is like a highly experimental system that's part of kind of advanced research, or if it would actually provide an actual signal, or if that is even known. And if it isn't known, then I mean, if it provides a high probability of good warning, early warning, then it is a community amenity. If it's a piece in a research project, then it really isn't a community amenity. So I'm a bit uncertain as to how that fits.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson?
I just have a question. I'm just wondering if it doesn't go to public hearing at this point, does that kill the proposal altogether, or is it the proponents could come back with a change to it or a new rezoning proposal?
That's right. So
Okay.
I think it would be fair to say, because we've made it this far along in the process, that council has expressed support for the general idea. We've had questions around traffic flow and safety. We've had questions around amenities. Our staff are negotiating on our behalf with the applicant around amenities. What's come forward to us today is something that I'm hearing a strong sense from council that it isn't quite right, and that at this time it would be more appropriate to direct staff to go back and continue the discussions with the proponent about, or the applicant about amenities, and to come back to council. Would you like a motion to that effect, or
I think I understand.
you understand where it's at? I mean, is it appropriate then to not make any motion at this point? Yeah, okay, that's fine. So says our staff. Yes, Councillor
Just
Anderson.
for staff and the applicant's benefit, I think I've given all my reasons that and my priorities in terms of considering this rezoning, and I hope that all other councillors have done that as well. Just because if staff and the proponent are both going to go back, renegotiate something, it would be a bad thing to come back to council and then one more thing comes up. So I hope that everybody has given all their reasons.
Thank you for that. So maybe let me attempt to summarize, and you can tell me if I'm doing this incorrectly. But what I am hearing is that there's a general consensus that the $5,000 amenity offered for aquatic programs would be more suitable to something of a capital nature, and maybe even to just up the affordable housing amenity contribution from $10,000 to $15,000, that would meet council's, likely to meet council's approval. Around the earthquake sensor, maybe that one's a little bit more challenging. We haven't really discussed that one in depth. There's some question about the temporary nature, the 10-year nature of that, and whether that, does council view that that is an amenity to the community, that it is of value, Or is it something that is a nice part of the package, but not figuring into your thinking about this being an amenity being offered as part of a rezoning application? So maybe just a few thoughts about that. Anyone? Councillor McMaster?
Financing.
And the financing, thank you. And then Councillor McMaster also asked a question about the lender's awareness of zoning, which is just as, if not more restrictive than a covenant that's placed on title. It still requires council approval to rezone to a future buyer or the same owner should they wish to change the nature of their business there. So any other expressions that you want to make just about around the earthquake sensor?
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please, Councillor Thick, go ahead.
Yeah, so further to my earlier comment, I think that I would not support the recommendation, and I would like to delay the public hearing until the community benefit policy has been reviewed. I don't think that going back and forth between negotiating is the right approach. I think the council needs to take a very firm stand. We need to decide what it is that's important to this community, and whether it's this rezoning application or the next one, or something next meeting, or next year. We have a list, and we have, it's pre-planned, it's well thought out, the staff are very knowledgeable, the council are in agreement, and we don't have to go through hours and hours of talking about things. I think there's a better way to do this, and that's why I don't support the recommendation for the public hearing until we have that sorted out. And I don't think it would take a long time. I think it can come easily after the February 17th strategic planning session. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Any response to that? Councillor Blanchette?
My response to that would be something like earthquake sensors would never appear on our list. So I think we have to be open to novel new ideas, and we have to remain open. We don't want a fixed, rigid list. And regarding this proposal, I don't think we're going to get a yes or no answer on whether an earthquake sensor is a community amenity. It's not a black or white question. We've got to figure out how to deal with that as well. Amenities that may be amenities, or that are 60% amenities and 40% research projects.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I mean, I think what Councillor Thick is suggesting has some merit. I think, especially as it's the start of this council's term almost, I think it needs to be discussed, but whether we should discuss it and put everything on hold for this particular thing in the queue, I'm not sure is right. But I think it needs to be discussed in the short term.
I have a certain amount of agreement with Councillor Thick, but also I don't like reacting and changing policy at every turn when an application comes forward, and I think it's unfair to applicants to do that. So.
Could I make a comment?
Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Thick.
In response to that, I'm not advocating that at all, Councillor Anderson. And what I'm suggesting is for the next 4 years, which is our term, that we actually construct a list of what is important. And in contrast to what Councillor Blanchette is saying, if earthquake sensors are a good idea, I think they will emerge in the list. I just think that I'm not suggesting the policy change as a result of this application. I'm talking about a very concerted, planned effort by this council for the next 4 years looking ahead. What happens after that, I can't really say, but I would like to make a plan for the next 4 years and stick to it, and that would be, I think, a lot easier and a lot safer for everyone. Then we all know exactly what's expected, or what not what's expected, but just what this community needs, and we don't change with every whim. So that's my comment.
Okay, thank you. So I've heard from 2 councillors, we've heard, I think, if I can paraphrase, that moving ahead with reviewing and setting some more formal policy around community amenity contributions is a wise idea, but there's not a sense of wanting to hold up this particular application whilst we do that. Because we are having a strategic planning session next Tuesday, and I do think that this can come up, although there's no guarantee that we'll resolve that within the one day. But I do think that by next Tuesday, we'll have a better idea of a path forward. So my suggestion to council would be that we move on, that we address this issue on the whole of community amenity contributions during our strategic planning session. We won't be discussing this application, of course, and that if it seems wise at that point, we'll come back on the next agenda and we can discuss this again. And it may be that staff have had some conversations with the applicant by then, and it may not, but that I think that it seems to be desirable to this council to continue moving forward and to continue working with the applicant. So we don't want to hold it up unnecessarily, and I appreciate the comments to that effect. Okay? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll move on then. So our next report is the development variance permit application. And Aaron is up again to speak to us about this one, which is an unusual set of circumstances.
So it's a doozy.
Yeah.
So today, the second presentation is to discuss development variance permit for two properties on Main Street, owned by Roland Arnet. So the two properties you can see here, Lot 8 and Lot 9. They both are adjacent to Main Street, and Lot 9 is adjacent to Wharf Street. The foreshore that we're going to be discussing today is this portion here. This is where the remote passages commercial operation is.
Aaron, can you speak up just
Sorry.
a little bit for council?
I was mumbling into the wall.
Yeah.
Okay, so development variance permit. How did we get here and why are we here? So the owner of the two upland properties, Mr. Roland Arnet, wishes to assign the foreshore lease attached to those two properties to another body. Basically, Mr. Don Travers and Ms. Katie Martini. To do so, they had to. I'll go back here. So, foreshore leases are always attached to the adjacent upland properties. To separate these leases, you need to go and talk to the Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations branch of the provincial government. They advised the applicants in this case that there would need to be an agreement signed between the parties guaranteeing servicing, access, and foreshore. Generally, this would happen by way of an easement. In this case, it's happening by way of lease because the foreshore property is crown land, and the way the regulations work, you can't provide an easement for those three purposes. Now, so that's the provincial side of it. They're saying if you want to separate these two, the foreshore lease from the upland properties, you need to provide leases. The Land Title Act, which is one of the regulations, some of the regulations that we operate under, say that any leases that are longer than 3 years means that it's a subdivision. So as much as it's supposed to be subdivided land to develop two properties, a lease is a subdivision. That's why we're involved. If there wasn't crown land and it wasn't a lease and it was an easement, we would not be involved at all. So, the leases in question are 29 years. They would match the existing foreshore lease. Therefore, they're longer than 3 years. Therefore, the applicants must apply to subdivide the property. They have done so. One of the stipulations to the subdivision will be to ensure that in compliance with the zoning bylaw. One of the provisions of the zoning bylaw is a minimum lot size, which in this case, in these lots, is 668 square feet. The proposed lot leases are between 27.5 meters and 179 meters squared. So we need a variance to allow the subdivision. That's where we are today. This is the plot plan of the property. This blue here is the lease for the servicing, to provide servicing to the building. This yellow lease is for the foreshore. And this green lease in the corner here is for access off of Wharf Street. And this is still table, which is also included in the report, sort of explains those in a little bit more detail. You can sort of see that the easements go over both properties, and so we had to sort of treat them a little bit different. Okay, so variance permits. How do we decide whether something should be varied? The first thing we do is in respect to zoning, a variance for a zoning bylaw, is look to the OCP. The proposal that we're talking about doesn't involve the building of a building or changing a setback. It just involves putting leases on the ground. There's going to be no material change to the property. So the properties you see today, unless somebody applies for a building permit, a development permit, or rezoning, will stay as it is. So we'll have the upland character of the old heritage buildings and the foreshore character of a working waterfront harbor, both which are supported in the OCP in a number of areas, and they're sort of provided here. I'm not going to read them all out, but that is the OCP support for the applicant's proposal for the variance. Staff also looks at other criteria in the variance. We look at what kind of impacts it has to the neighborhood, and we do this for every variance. In the case of this property, it does preserve the former character of a street or neighborhood. There's no proposed changes. Considering protection, preservation, and natural features and functions, including ecological functions and topography of the lot, reducing the need for major site preparation, it doesn't. It's an NA. They're not proposing a building. Design and siting should account for solar exposure in private spaces, thereby decreasing building energy requirements. Again, we're not proposing any buildings. This is just leases. Create superior siting with respect to privacy. This one's again an NA. Enhances use from neighboring properties. Well, it doesn't enhance them, but neither does it impede them. Nothing is being proposed, so we see that as meeting the criteria. And finally, allowing flexibility in building design without impact to neighboring properties. Since we're not building a building, again, this doesn't really apply. So using the OCP provisions and this other criteria, staff is recommending that we provide the variances. I should also stress that this is not a precedent-setting maneuver. This is a very unique development proposal involving a foreshore and upland properties. Part of the reason we're even having this discussion is that the one lot is adjacent to Wharf Street, providing access to lot 9. Without that sort of unique access or the access to the water, we might not even be having this discussion. So I just want, when we talk about variances, the variances are limited to the discussion that we're having today. They don't set precedent or mean that we have to do this again in the future. We are not fettering, at this point, the subdivision approving officer's authority. We're, as council, you as council, are considering a development variance permits, which varies the zoning bylaw. The approving officer process is separate from this, and he still has to make decisions about access, community needs, and other stuff. So this is just one step in the subdivision process. The subdivision could not proceed without this step, though, to be clear. Okay, discussion.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions for Aaron about the technicalities of this application? Councillor Anderson.
Just one question. I'm just wondering this almost seems like a Board of Variance situation. I'm just wondering what separates it. It's not quite hardship, or is that it?
We wouldn't classify it as hardship. I mean, technically it could go to the Board of Variance, but this is fairly clearly a developed variance. It's council's responsibility it's under council's responsibility to make this decision.
Councillor Blanchette.
My main concern with this is unintended consequences. Like if we reduce the Lot 8 minimum subdivision size from 668 to 48 square meters, then does that mean it'll be possible in the future if some tiny house evangelist comes along to create 13 more 48 square meter lots on that?
No. This is particularly for these 3 leases.
Mhm.
And even if somebody wanted to come and do that, and they were allowed to do it or not, they'd have to go through the whole process of rezoning, and then development permits, and then onto subdivision and access and servicing. And it's extremely, extremely unlikely. I don't even know if it's likely. I would say it's not going to happen.
And how would this, if the current property owner or the owner of the 2 properties were to want to subdivide his properties, sell the one that the house isn't on, even though it's a rocky knoll, it's not much of a building lot, how would that?
So let's say if they wanted to subdivide half of this,
No, if.
Those are 2 lots.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
but they're both owned by the same
Owner.
person.
Mhm.
So if he wanted to sell the one that his house is not on,
yeah, it would come. So it would come. You know, as a seller, these leases would show up in title,
yeah.
and they'd be the purchaser would be responsible for maintaining those leases. You know, whatever the agreement is. So it wouldn't.
It wouldn't negate the lease or anything?
No, in a way, it almost limits the developability of that property, because now that lease is on there for 29
Yeah.
years, and you know, somebody came to the district in 10 years from now and said, "I'd like to put in a 3-story building there during commercial." We said, "Well, you have these leases running across your property, and how would you deal with that?" And so,
And my other question is, at the end of the 29 years, when the leases and the waterfront lease expire, what happens then?
it's my understanding that well, either the current owners would extend that lease, or the current holders of the lease. And if they did not, then the upland property owners at that time would have the opportunity to apply for a lease, or just it would stay empty, similar to our lease at the end of here, it's sort of inactive. We have a district lease here from a long time ago that's inactive.
Councillor Anderson?
Does this, the new lots that are created, so any building would be subject to new setbacks? So,
It would be subject to the same setbacks as currently exist on the R2 zoned lots.
okay. So the new lines setbacks would start at the new lines, or they would all remain the same?
So the setbacks would, I'll forward it this way. The setbacks would be based on the street setbacks. So it would be, from the side yard setback is 15 feet in. The front yard in an R2 is, I think, it's 25 feet and 40 from the back. So those setbacks would still apply. There wouldn't be any setbacks associated with these, because in a sense, even though we're going through a subdivision process, they're still leases.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Fick, do you have any questions?
Yes, I think Councillor Anderson asked this question, but I didn't hear the answer. I have 3 questions. One is, were the Board of Variance consulted in this question?
No, they were not.
And I'm just wondering why this wouldn't be a question for the Board of Variance, since we have that. We could have that group look at this in more detail and come with a recommendation to the council, understanding that it's a bit of an anomaly.
Respectfully, that's not the Board of Variance's role. The Board of Variance reviews variances related to hardship. So someone could not build their house in a certain area because it was too steep, or there was a stream coming through their property and they had to do. That's what the Board of Variance deals with. Variances such as this, the very bylaws, is correctly through the variance permit process. The Board of Variance is not a committee of council. It's not a referral body. It's a separate body that addresses certain items. This could have gone to the Board of Variance, and if you read the legislation, most likely what would happen is the Board of Variance would say this has no hardship provision, and they would flip back to council with the development variance permit. And so while staff can't tell applicants which route to take, we can consider what might happen and provide good advice about routes to take for process. But this one is fairly clearly not a Board of Variance application.
Did you hear that, Councillor Fick?
Okay, sorry, it's really hard to hear. It seems like there's just not very clear on your end, so I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but
You are.
the second question was, since this is an anomaly, was a legal opinion sought by the staff on this issue?
Staff did consult our lawyers, and we consulted our approving officer, and we also contacted a number of other approving officers and approving bodies, and asked a number of questions about this. And so it has been reviewed extensively by our lawyers and the approving officer right from the beginning of the process.
So the legal opinion and the approving officer are in agreement, from what I hear you say?
Yeah, it wasn't an opinion. It was a question of this is a proposal. Is this possible that we can do this, and how do we walk through it? So we didn't ask for, we just sort of asked about the process. How would we go about this, and how would we make sure that we cross all our T's and dotted all our I's?
Okay, well, the third question I had was, will there be a covenant on title for access as a pedestrian walkway? Because as I understand it, and maybe staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but at the point of subdivision, or this is just a request for variance, but this is the only chance that we have, and I understand from I think it's the official community plan and the Main Street that we were interested in a pedestrian walkway along the front, and that's been put through in a number of properties, and I'm just wondering if we can ensure this in this process.
As you correctly stated, this is the variance permit process, but the next step is subdivision, and that is something we can bring up with Graham Savage, our approving officer, and something he may be looking at when he reviews the official community plan. We will have some covenants on the property to lock in the leases from our side as well when we get to that step. And so I can bring up the waterfront walkway, and if it's under his authority, we can have that discussion then.
Okay, that would be good, because from my point of view, or from my opinion, I guess, both groups of people will benefit from this work, and I'm not against that benefit at all, but I do feel that there should be a community benefit, and that's been thought of and itemized long before our time in terms of the pedestrian walkway, and I think that is absolutely crucial in this process, and that would be the only reason that I would withhold my vote on this, is if that was not ensured.
Okay.
Okay, and to be clear, that will come up during the subdivision process, but cannot come up in the variance authorization.
Yeah, but unless we're
Thank you for
rezoned.
clarifying it.
But thank you for stating your opinion. Councillor, very good.
If during the 29-year lease, owners change, what happens?
So the owners of the lease or owners of the upland property?
Either one, or both.
Basically, the upland owners, or the foreshore owners, could sell that lease or sell the ability to have that lease to another group or another person, and they would still have the access to the properties. The upland owners could sell, and whoever bought would have to follow the restrictions on the property that we're placing. So basically nothing.
Nothing. Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, any other or final questions for staff?
I'm going to move the recommendation.
Thank you.
Sorry.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that a development variance permit be issued for Lot 8, Block 2, District Lot 114, Clackett Land District Plan 717, which is 336 Main Street, varying the required minimum lot area from 668 square meters to 47.9 square meters to permit a proposed lease subdivision, and that a development variance permit be issued for Lot 9, Block 2, District Lot 114, Clackett Land District Plan 717, which is 71 Wharf Street, varying the required minimum lot area from 668 square meters to 27.5 square meters to permit a proposed lease subdivision. Is there any final discussion on the motion?
I'd like to speak, if I
Please?
could.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Thick.
I would like to table this until the next council meeting. I think that it is something that seems to be in progress for several months. I'm not in opposition to the notion. I just think that I would like to understand this more and the implications And I also feel that with another councillor missing whose insight might be valuable, that is what I'd like to bring to the table. Is that I would like to discuss this again at the next council meeting, and that's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you. So a tabling motion is appropriate to postpone the discussion until later in the meeting, but not, if you wish, you could make a motion to defer or postpone the decision, and then we can see if you have a seconder.
All right, I would like to make a motion to defer the decision or the recommendation
But she wants to make.
until the next council meeting on this issue.
Sorry, Councillor Fitt, one moment.
Yeah.
We're just doing a little parliamentary procedure check here.
You could refer it to a different point in the agenda, but not to another. Yeah, tape.
Because the motion is on the floor.
Yeah.
It could be tabled till later in the meeting today, but it cannot be referred or deferred, postponed. Okay, I understand. Did you hear that, Councillor Fitt?
No, I couldn't hear it very well.
Okay, because there's a motion on the floor,
Yeah,
we can entertain a motion to table, and that's no discussion on tabling. We go, if you have a seconder, we go to a vote, and be it what it is, but it was inappropriate for the deferral motion. Sorry, that was my mistake.
yeah, and I'm sorry, I realize that too, when there's a motion on the table.
Yeah.
I'm just expressing my opinion, but it's hard without being there.
Okay. So do you have a motion you wish to make right now then, to table, or no?
Well, if it's tabled, then it only goes to later in the meeting, is that correct? And that doesn't solve the issue for me.
No, it doesn't.
So if that is the case, then I guess I would vote against the motion.
Okay. Is there any final discussion on the motion? All right, I will call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
I would vote opposed.
Okay, thank you. The motion is carried. All right, well, that was interesting. Thank you for your patience, everybody. All right, so we're going to move on now to the Civic Center Feasibility Study Final Report, which is the 150 odd pages in your council package. And we have a recommendation from staff to receive the report for information. I'd like to suggest that now is the time if you have any questions for staff, any preliminary comments that you wish to make. But my recommendation to council is not to get into too much substantive discussion until after we undertake our strategic planning session. Anyone? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
Just to get the discussion on I'll move the recommendation to get discussion on the floor.
Thank you.
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded that the Tofino Civic Center feasibility study dated November 2014 be received for information. Any discussion? Councillor Anderson.
I'm really glad that we got this work done to have a good look at it, and I'm quite satisfied with the report. It gives us a pretty clear picture of what it would take to achieve those uses on the land here. And it will need to take a hard look at it, and both from terms of costs and what the community really wants. And it's a little overwhelming actually to look at particularly the costs, and then also to get my whole head around the amount of building that would happen here. Just one comment, I don't think it's the best bang for the buck. It seems I'm not sure how much square footage we're gaining, and I want to look into that more before I really comment on that. But yeah, those are preliminary comments, and I don't want to get into any of the details of it myself until some further point when we look at it again.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blanchette.
I heard some discussion in the audience beforehand, so I just think maybe for public information, could we ask staff to give us some indication of how conceptual or how cast in stone this plan, this report is? Is that appropriate?
Absolutely. April, go ahead.
So this is a preliminary concept based on stakeholder input that was gathered through the needs assessment phase, which took place in 2013 and into 2014, and then the feasibility stage. So the needs from all the interested stakeholders were taken into account, and this concept was developed. Should the project move forward, a much more detailed concept and business plan would need to be done. So this doesn't give us enough information to start putting a shovel in the ground tomorrow.
For this good report, well nervous with all the wants in the community as to what to do first and where the money's going to come from. But it's a good start.
Councillor Tofino?
I don't know if Councillor Anderson addressed it or not, when I missed. But I see the council and office space and everything else is possibly even less than what the CBT would be requiring. They require that much space, 2,500, 20?
Yeah, so the needs of the other stakeholders were collected by the consultant and put into the plan in terms of square footage. One thing, and this sort of is in response to Councillor Anderson's question, that was discovered about this building during the needs assessment is that it's just really not very efficiently laid out. So there's a lot of space here that's not being very effectively used. So while there might not be substantially more space in the new plan, it would be much better used. This building has a lot of hallways, as you may have noticed, a lot of circulation.
And the other thing I noticed is that there's no mention at all, and was any consideration given to museum.
So museum space came up early in the plan, and there is a room in the building that's called public space. It's identified if you look on the plan as public space. And what was discussed is not a dedicated museum space because of the cost of having to maintain and staff that, but rather display space in a public space that would allow us to display museum type materials, but not actually specific to a museum.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thick, any questions or comments?
Oh, I really, the parking and the design have a lot to be desired for me personally. However, what I really appreciated in the report was the funding strategy section. So even though it's kind of bare bones, I really think that is the important part to be addressed. And as far as the actual design, I'll reserve my comments for a later date, but it to me doesn't look at all like the kind of concept we would have in Tofino. That's my take on that one. But I really appreciated the overall work, and I appreciated the concept for the funding as being included in that. So thank you to staff for that.
Thank you. Councillor Blanchette?
Further to Councillor Thick's comments, I'm just wondering whether this should be considered kind of a document to push forward to the public, whether we should be promoting this, or whether this is more of an internal document for our own kind of discussion and fundraising purposes. What council thinks about that and what staff thinks about that.
So when we initiated this process during the last council term, we were always very straightforward and clear that we would do this in our regular meetings and that it make the public aware, but that we weren't going out for a full-blown public consultation process until we had some preliminary information. In my opinion, that's exactly what this report does. It provides us a preliminary concept, some initial exploration with potential partners, and now is the time for council to consider, not now at this exact moment, but now at the beginning of our term as we contemplate many different projects ahead of us. This is the time for us to consider, do we wish to move forward with this, and if so, how? At which time I think absolutely this is something that would be much more widely publicized, and we would ask the public to engage with us on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so this is not we're going to build this document.
No,
Very
it was never conceived that way. It really was something that the last council decided that before we could even have an informed debate or discussion on such a concept, that we needed some basic information. And so that's exactly what the consultants and our staff have done under the last council's direction to do so. Yeah. Councillor Anderson, did you want to?
Yeah, just one final thing, that I really did appreciate as well the funding strategy presented in the report. It showed that it's more achievable than I thought, so that's one last comment.
Only the recommendation.
It's already on.
Is it?
Yep. Okay, any final discussion? The motion, everyone's clear, the motion to receive. Okay, I'll call the question then. All in favor? Thank you. Councillor Pick?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion is carried. Okay, moving on, we're going to consider the federal gas tax strategic priorities fund application, speaking of funding. And we have a report in our package and a recommendation from staff that we authorize them to submit a grant application to the federal gas tax strategic priorities fund capital infrastructure project stream to help fund a share of the costs in Main Street 2.0. Thank you.
Enthusiastically seconded.
All right, so it's been moved and enthusiastically seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Any questions? Yes, Councillor Blanchette.
I see in the report that they talk about construction starting in fall of this year. The last I heard of this, I was in the audience, or maybe talking to a councillor last year, and the hope was that construction would start this spring and be ready for this summer busy season. Did I hear wrong, or has it been pushed back?
So I think we talked about construction in 2015, but it was never really determined spring versus fall. Fall leaves us a lot more room in terms of, achieving the project. I think we've experienced with Campbell Street that it's often a real rush to get the project done before summer, and constructing the project in the fall, I think it's just a much more realistic timeline. As it is right now, council has only given direction for staff to do design drawings, so we still have to talk about the construction through budget.
Any other questions? Councillor Pick, any questions? Councillor Thurgood?
If approved, which I suspect it will be, the design drawings will come back. We'll see them, preview them.
Yeah, so design drawings are underway right now, and those will come forward for council and the public's consideration, the conceptual design drawings in mid-March.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll call the question, and all those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
This is for the report, or I couldn't hear, is it the federal gas?
This is the motion to authorize staff to submit the grant application for the gas tax on Main Street 2.0.
Yes, agree.
Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay, next, the 2015 Tofino Ambassador Program. So council's had, over the last few years, we've had several discussions, and we've had a report from the Chamber of Commerce about 2014 Tofino Ambassador Program. And at that time, we discussed the fact that we would, staff would be discussing with the Chamber of Commerce a one-year agreement to bring the various deadlines into place. And so because we haven't completed our budget process, we have an early budget approval request for the Tofino Ambassador Program to fund to undertake a shared cost agreement for 1 year. And included in the recommendation from staff is that the Tofino Chamber be permitted to subcontract delivery of the program to the Raincoast Education Society, as they did last year, but we had to entertain a second motion later on. So we're trying to do it all at once this year.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded that the 2015 Tofino Ambassador Program be funded as per, subject to confirmation by the province of BC, and that the CAO be authorized to execute the agreement between the District of Tofino and the Chamber for the delivery of the program, and that the Chamber be permitted to subcontract delivery to the Raincoast Education Society. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Thick, any discussion?
No, good.
Councillor Thurgood?
So this would bring the program for the ambassador, in line with the resort development strategy for 26, and the end of 2016, or to the end of 2015, right?
The ambassador program is in the resort development strategy, which is a 5-year strategy, 2012 to 2016. So we actually have 2 more years that have been approved for the strategy for the program, and there's funds earmarked for the program, assuming the money keeps coming from the province. Tourism Tofino has an agreement for their share of the program with the chamber, and that agreement has 1 more year left on it. So by extending our agreement, our contract for the delivery of the program for 1 more year, we're bringing those 2 agreements in line.
I would, as per my motion in last October, I would still like to see this put off to the budget process, which is just a month away.
So they're coming to us.
I know they're asking for an early
Yeah,
approval,
because the planning needs to go underway. The program begins as early as April. And so for them to wait for us, we may not be completed budget till May 15th, 2015, and it's simply too late for them. So that's the answer of why it's here now. Any other discussion on the motion? I will call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
Yes?
The motion is carried. Okay, moving on. The new Building Canada Fund grant application. We have a lengthy report in our package that explains why staff are recommending that they be authorized to submit a grant application to the new Building Canada Fund in the amount of $1,165,291.20 to help share in the cost of the Bars Mountain Reservoir and Water Main upgrade projects. And further, a recommendation that the District of Tofino contribute 1/3 of the project funding for a total cost of $384,546.01. As well, it goes on. Let me turn to the next page. That's the first recommendation, and then the second recommendation from staff is that they be authorized to include an additional internal contingency of $58,264.56, which represents 5% of the total project cost. Any?
My only concern with this was whether it was on the contingency was 5%. When you factor the Tofino factor, it could be a little light.
Nyla, please.
Thank you for that. The contingency in the grant application is 15% of project cost, and we're adding an additional 5%. So the overall contingency would be 20%.
Okay.
So this is the Tofino factor, I think. Okay. Councillor Anderson?
I'll move the first part of the recommendation.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Then that staff be authorized to submit the grant application and that the District of Tofino contribute 1/3 of the project funding. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Anderson?
Just a question of I guess some of the contribution will be coming out of reserves, and I just want a feel of where that leaves the reserves. Do you use them all up? Does he use part of them? Part money comes from somewhere else. Just a little bit around our contribution.
Sure, thank you.
Through the chair. So the majority of the contribution is going to come from the Water Capital Bylaw Reserve. There will be funds left over. It's basically just coming from one reserve right now. We have, over the last couple of years, through the property value tax levy for water infrastructure, been setting aside $75,000 a year. So we will be using that portion. And that all goes in one reserve called the Water Capital Bylaw Reserve. That reserve has been established by bylaw, and this does meet the purpose in the bylaw.
And then the second part was, where does that leave the reserves? Does that use up the majority of them, half of them, rough estimate?
Yeah, I don't have the exact dollar amount, but because our audit isn't complete for 2014, but I'm guessing it'll be in between $300,000 and $400,000 left in that reserve.
It's nice to get a picture of where the reserve's at as we prove these things. Not that even if I used up all the reserve, I would still support it.
Yes, this is a project that's been in the planning for quite some time. Any other questions? Councillor Thick, any questions?
Two quick questions.
Mhm.
One is the new Building Canada Fund. Is that issued on a yearly basis then?
There has been this grant before. This is, it's slightly different than the old offerings. I don't believe it's been confirmed past.
But I can't hear. Does it mean that, for example, if we apply for this now, next year, do we have an opportunity to do something else, or is this once every 2 or 3 years, or how does it work?
I don't know that.
I believe this is an annual opportunity, provided that the federal government provides the opportunity. So
Yeah.
there's no guarantee. This is an opportunity that we have for 2015 though.
Right. And the second question was in relation to the second part of the report. Has the access issues then, are we to assume that that has all been sorted out? It says that it was put on hold 2014 due to access, but has that all been resolved?
Unfortunately, I don't know if we can provide an update right now. Sorry, Councillor Thick.
The reason I ask is, in other words, if we apply for this and, forego another possibility and we don't have those access issues resolved, would this negate our chances of getting it and thereby preclude us from, say, applying for something else that we could have applied to?
I don't have an answer.
We don't have an answer for that, unfortunately.
That's a pretty big gamble then, isn't it?
It's a pretty big gamble not to try and do it at all.
Did you hear that, Councillor Thick? Councillor Thick?
I couldn't hear the answer there to Councillor.
I said this is a big gamble not to try and do it because this is fairly important for the community. So I think we need to see if we can get the money so we can tackle this project.
Understood. I just would hate for us to be crossed off the list with all the work involved and not have that small issue resolved. That's all. That's my only question. Otherwise, I would be in agreement.
Understood. I think that, as is the way of these kinds of grants, that just if we're awarded the grant, that there is room for negotiation with the government about when the project actually takes place. And I think it's fairly standard that things don't always happen within months. And this is a project that's planned for 2017, if I understand correctly. So we're gathering the resources to do it. I think that we could be pretty confident that by 2017 we'll have any access issues worked out. Unfortunately, Councillor Thick, I'm sorry that I didn't announce this at the beginning of the meeting so you knew, but our CAO is not with us today. He's sick. So we can't have his comment because he's not here.
Can I just ask staff if there's a deadline for applying for these grants? Or is it-
Yes. What do you mean?
February 18th.
So
So that
the
is
deadline
still-
for the application is next Wednesday.
Yeah.
So yeah, that
That's what
puts
I
a bit of
thought. So I think we should support this recommendation to get our application in.
I'm in agreement. Any other discussion? Councillor Thurgood?
The size of our existing tank, what is it?
431 cubic meters.
Okay.
Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion is carried. And so we have a second part of this
So
recommendation.
moved.
Thank you, Councillor McMaster. Seconded by Councillor Anderson to authorize the additional internal contingency of just over $58,000. Any discussion on this motion? I'll call the, oh, I won't. I'll say Councillor Blanchette.
Where does that contingency come from? The same reserve fund?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
And you say you'll figure there'll be $300,000 to $400,000 left in that reserve fund?
Approximately.
So we're talking only 60,000, okay.
Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick? Councillor Thick?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay. So our final matter of business on the open agenda are the minutes from the Tofino Recreation Commission. There's also a recommendation included in those minutes, but I would respectfully ask council that we delay consideration of that recommendation, and the Tofino Recreation Commission is coming as a delegation to our next committee of the whole meeting, and I think it would be more appropriate to have discussion with them with full council's presence as well before we consider the recommendation. However, we'll start with the minutes.
I'll move to go through the minutes.
Everybody moves to receive, so I think by unanimous consent, the minutes of the Tofino Recreation Commission meeting held January 21st, 2015 are received. Thank you. Okay, any questions from the minutes there, or any discussion you want to have, or anything about mine?
Do we need to refer that resolution or the recommendation to that meeting, or do
Yes. Are
we
you
just
moving
bring
to
it up?
refer the recommendation to the next committee of the whole meeting?
I would, yes.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McMaster. Any discussion on that? Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Thick?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion is carried. Okay, we have no bylaw business, no new business. We do have time for questions, and so anyone who has a question or statement? Yes, please, Astordo.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I just don't know so much have questions, but just some comments. I'm the applicant for the 511 project, and so could I respond to some of the comments?
You may have up to 2 minutes to make your statement.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great, thanks. So just on the 3 points there, first of all, I'd just like to say that the bank that actually we've been in communication with is Coastal Community Credit Union here on the island. So the banker there, she's quite familiar with the area in Tofino, and she's been kind of up to date with what's happening. But if there's any particular questions specifically that you guys have, we'd be more than happy to find out and get those answers for you. So, sorry, a little nervous here, pressure. But in regards to the community fund there, so when we were discussing with Aaron, so the two trains of thought we had were, do we add that extra $5,000 into the community affordable housing to make it a grand total of 15, excuse me, or do we split it and put something into more of what we thought an experience? So one would be have 10,000 into the affordable housing, and then this extra 5,000 to share with the community for an experience. We just kind of felt that experiences to kids and to the community are quite valuable, just as much as something materialistic in a sense. So we just kind of wanted to see that money, part of that money, be used right away, as opposed to just sit in a bank and who knows what's going to happen with it or when it's going to happen. So that's the reason why we offered that. And Councillor Blanchette, in regards to the early warning system. So if I may just kind of tell you a little bit of the background behind that. My father is actually a professor at UBC. He's an earthquake engineer, and this is his project. He has this set up with the Ministry of Education, and it's actually not a research project. It has been implemented, and there's been quite a few schools through the mainland, lower mainland, that already have this system in place. So basically what we are wanting to do is we want to implement this system. So what it is, if you guys aren't familiar, it's just a sensor that is dug into the ground. So when this ground starts shaking, it sends up a warning, and it gives us a few extra seconds of warning to be prepared what's happening. And might not seem like much, a few seconds, but it will make it, can make a difference between getting, kids to safety or for adults as well. So, so basically, we want to install this system into our property there, and we want to share that information with you guys. The upkeep and the maintenance will not be held on the district. That would be something that we would take. And in regards to the lifespan, it's just technology. So I guess the best example I could use is with your cell phone. In 2 years, when your contract is up and you go to renew it, tell us there's going to be new equipment set up. You can just kind of trade it. So the reality is that the sensor in 10 years is going to be outdated. So as new sensors be developed and technology gets updated, we just kind of update it as it goes. So it's not to say that in 10 years it's done, it's proved, it's gone. It's just technology, basically. So yeah, I just wanted to address those points and just say thanks a lot for all your comments and just the diligence that you guys are doing in this project. And yeah, we just really hope that we can get this done and provide this service for the community. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay then, Councillor Anderson?
Okay, I'll move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 91B of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual who is being considered for a municipal award or honor.
Thank you. Seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Blanchette. All in favor? Councillor Fick?
I couldn't hear any of that, sorry.
Oh, we have a motion on the floor to go in camera, and I'm asking you for your vote.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. So the motion is carried.